This reminds me, one time I was in it was a play. It was a black theater group in Pensacola, and I was the first white person to be in the play. Somebody came up to me and he said, "How did you get a part in a play?" I said, well, I gave him $20,000. And for $20,000, you can be in the play too. So you can be a world-class speaker too if you give $1 million for the intro. So thank you very much, Ed. Nice to be here. I wish you got so many other people here. Katie Garrett. Katie Garrett, I don't know if you've ever, she's a great speaker. She spoke at Dr. Perkins' Innovation and Entrepreneurship class this year. She's a graduate of University of West Florida. She's got a master's in University of West Florida. And even more important than that, she owns the Old Hickory Whiskey Bar in downtown Pensacola. So, yeah. And she is exactly, if you want to know how to do it, she's really the type of person that can tell you how to do it. So I'm glad to be here. And as you know, you have an idea, you can win $5,000, which is really, really nice. So what did I give the $1 million for to University of West Florida? I gave it for 3 reasons. Number one, to attract students that wouldn't normally come to the University of West Florida. I have a very self-interest in this, though, is that I can only build companies on talent. And the number one thing that everybody's looking for right now is talent. Shovel-ready land gets a lot of publicity for some reason. You know, you got to have shovel-ready land to attract companies. You got to have incentives to attract companies. That's okay, but that's really not the key. The key is you got to have talent. So part of why I gave the money is, one, I've been very fortunate when I built the Studer Group, and I'm not a successful serial entrepreneur. I've started a lot of companies, but I only hit gold with one. And what I've learned, though, if you hit the right one can help you do a lot of other things. So I started a company in 2000 for Studer Group, we called it, for healthcare consulting, and I sold it in 2015 for $325 million. So you only need one. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So all this other stuff I do, it really isn't a great return on investment financially, but it's no different than why I started Studer Group. The reason I started Studer Group wasn't to make money, it was to make a difference. And that's really why I did it. It was to make healthcare better for patients, employees, and physicians. I had been in a spot where I worked in a place that really wasn't a great place to work. I worked for a boss that really was a difficult boss. And you might say, why don't you quit? Well, a few reasons. Number one, I had so little self-confidence after working with this individual that I didn't think I could get probably a job anywhere else. I'd been sort of allowed myself to be whittled down. In fact, I went to therapy, and the therapist said to me, she looked at me one day, Amy Storm is her name. I went to Catholic Social Services in Janesville, Wisconsin. And she said to me, you know, when I tell you something positive, you deflect it. When I tell you something negative, you let it in. And here I was, 31 years old, depressed as can be, twice divorced, just a mess, wanting to kill myself most of the time, thinking I was the biggest loser in the world. And I go to therapy, and the therapist, this ain't the whole solution, but she says to me, maybe the reason you feel so bad about yourself is all you ever let in is what's wrong instead of what's right. She said, when I tell you something good, you actually deflect it and you push away from me. So no wonder you feel so bad about you. You filter out the positive. So one of my messages today is learn how to take a compliment. Don't push back. I can't tell you how many people I go to compliment, and then they say, well, not really. I could do better. You know, you don't really know the truth. And I have to say, well, wait a minute. Just say thank you. Now, how did I get there? And let me explain, and then I'll get into all this entrepreneur stuff. Because really, if you don't get yourself right on the inside, the outside's not going to matter. My greatest success is not money. It's being able to be comfortable in my own skin. That's the greatest success. To be able to look in a mirror and feel like you're okay. To be able to feel like you're not a con, that you're not faking anyone out. That if they really knew you, they might not really like you because you feel like such a loser on the inside. And that was me. Now, I can't tell you why. I can't blame anyone but the fact that just the way I was. When I grew up, I always felt I didn't fit in, didn't work, and if you really ever knew me, it just wouldn't work. I went to college when I was 18 years old, got a girl pregnant almost immediately, got married at 18 years old, and I liked having a baby. I think I needed somebody to love me. So I had my first child when I was 19 years old. Had my second child when I was 20 years old. So I had 2 kids when I was 20 years old, but something was missing. And I grew up, my parents ran a tavern, and I grew up a lot around alcohol, and all I knew is when I took a drink, I felt a little braver, a little better, a little stronger, a little more like I fit in. So a big part of my talk is if you're going to be successful in life, whether you're an entrepreneur, is really looking at obstacles as opportunities. And I didn't get that for a long time. I'm hearing impaired. I'm deaf on my right side. I only hear on my left side. I only hear a little bit. Now, that meant I was behind in school, and I still miss a lot of things. I have to watch everything closed caption. A lot of comedies aren't as funny in closed caption. You know, I'm a day late and $1 short, you know what I mean? So I thought being hearing impaired was a disadvantage, and it was, but it ended up being a tremendous advantage for me, because when you don't hear, you got to focus and concentrate. So I'm actually a very good listener. If you and I have a one-on-one conversation, I will be able to repeat back to you almost everything you said, and I amaze people because I can almost repeat back everything that I heard in a meeting, because I have to focus so hard, doesn't come some naturally. So here, a hearing impairment ended up being something that was positive. An obstacle became an opportunity. I have a speech impediment. My speech impediment, my mom was the only one that could understand me until I was 5 years old. So I had speech classes all the time. Even today, if you'll notice my hands, it's a prop. I'm doing this to let a tone and a cadence of my voice. Now the problem is if I stutter or stop or stammer, I have to keep going, because once I stop, it's hard to get restarted again. So I've been taught when I speak to use my hands. I've also learned to only pronounce words that I can pronounce. It's a remarkable thing when you figure that out. You know, but because when you hear the word and you actually think you can pronounce it, because in your brain it's saying it the right way, and then you go to say it and it comes out, and it doesn't come out like you wanted it to. Now, I spent 12 years traveling the country talking to some of the smartest people in the world, at Cleveland Clinic, at Mayo Clinic, some of the greatest physicians in the world I would talk to. And I loved it because I'd mispronounce a word, and I keep right on going. And I could just see them look at me and say, my God, that guy's smart. I've never heard that word before. You're gonna have to look that one up. So again, but what it taught me is about leadership. Because leadership is not only listening and taking an obstacle and turning it an opportunity. Leadership is doing something that's very hard to do over and over and over again until it becomes easier to do. If you have a speech impediment, you have to repeat things over and over and over, even when they're uncomfortable and even when you're failing. When you're running a business or doing anything, you have to start over, and over again till you get it. David Alexander was a police chief here in the city of Pensacola. I guarantee you when he was an early cadet, things didn't come easy. You went to your first domestic disturbance, it's a whole new ballgame. After you do it 20 or 30 years, you get a little better at it, and the only difference is the experience. So who would have thought that a speech impediment would help me be a leader, maybe even in the community? To move things in Pensacola, we had to do things over and over and over again, even when there was a lot of pushback and a lot of pain. But you sort of learn that when you have a speech impediment. My other issue is alcoholism. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I haven't drank since December 24th, 1982. And, you know, that was an amazing thing. Because if you would have asked me on December 23rd, was I an alcoholic, I would have said, no, I'm just fine. I'm just fine. Yeah, a couple divorces, but they weren't my fault. You know, I hate my boss, but you know, he's a crummy boss. I don't like my job. Everything was if only. If I only went to the right school, married the right woman, lived in the right town, had the right amount of dollars, always an if only. I got a gift. I did nothing to deserve it. I woke up December 25th, 1982, and all of a sudden I looked and I got the greatest gift any one of us can get is self-awareness. It's pretty interesting when they were talking to Ray Blasio, the head of Bridgewater, who built a $17 billion company. They asked him, what's the two biggest things about building a company? He said, you can't have a big ego, and you got to have self-awareness. I work with 2 private equity firms right now that buy companies, and I ask them what's the number one thing they look for in a company they invest in. They say a founder who's got self-awareness because they know what they're good in and what they're weak in, and they're teachable and coachable. So who would have thought? And I didn't get it on myself. I just got a gift. I woke up one morning, I had a moment of clarity, they call it, and I realized this ain't working. And then I did something else, I reached out for help. So one of the main messages I'd like you to walk away with this morning, if possible, is none of us go through life undefeated. None of us go through where we don't have a little depression, that we don't feel like maybe we don't fit in, like we don't. Every place I've ever gone new, I sit at that table and I think I don't belong even today. Every place. In fact, when I first became a vice president of a hospital, I couldn't believe it because I don't even have a degree in healthcare administration. And I'm sitting around the table with all the other vice presidents and I'm thinking, I don't belong here. Then I found one, I said, well, I'll last longer than him. As long as he's at this table, I'm safe. But the reality is I always do that, but now I know it. Now I know I'm going to go through a bit of discomfort until I get comfortable. So that's another gift. Now, ironically, that's what led me into healthcare because I'm a recovering alcoholic, so I'm going to meetings at a treatment facility. And at the time, I was a teacher and a bartender. I almost quit teaching because it was getting in the way of bartending. You know, my 1% income was more valuable than 90%. Well, so now I'm not bartending anymore, but I'm going to meetings, 12-step meetings at a treatment center. And as I'm going to this treatment center, one day I find out they're looking for an employee there. So I thought it'd be pretty cool to work in a treatment center, helping people. So I went to work at a treatment center. In fact, it was a wonderful job. I remember one time a woman from Milton, Wisconsin. I was up in Janesville, Wisconsin. They have a Milton there too, Milton, Wisconsin. She called up in the treatment center, and the nurses were all taking care of people, so I answered the phone. So the other thing you learn about being successful is there's no such thing as that's not my job. You do what's in front of you because you got to eat your own cooking and you got to lead by example. You can't ask anybody to do something you won't do yourself. In fact, a sad story. When I worked at the treatment facility, we had a woman that came in. She had a daughter who was in high school, and it was a mess. And the daughter blamed herself for mom's drinking, even though she didn't do it, because mom probably said that for a while, and now mom's getting sober. And I was really excited because the high school that I used to teach at had a female counselor who told me she grew up in an alcoholic home. So I said, isn't this neat? Because this girl that goes to this high school now can go to this female counselor because she's got something in common with her, and that high school counselor can help her. So I picked up the phone and I called the high school counselor, and I was so excited because I wanted to explain to her about this girl who's in her high school that she could now help, and she said, I just can't do it. She said, I've never dealt with it myself. What I've learned, if we don't take ourselves on the journey, we can't take anyone else on the journey with us. So I start working in this treatment facility. I answer the phone. This woman calls up and says, please come get me. She's drunk. She wants us to get her before her husband comes home because her husband will be mad if she gets help because he drinks with her. So I get in the car. I go with a nurse. We pick her up. We drive her back to the treatment facility. About 3 days later, she looks at me. She sees me. She's out of detox. She recognizes me. She says, you helped save my life. Now, I never helped save her life. I just drove her. But I want to tell you what I think we all are looking for is something to have purpose. We want to do worthwhile work. And we want to make a difference. And that's what you have to grab with your passion. So I end up working in a treatment facility because I'm an alcoholic. So what I'm trying to say to you, something I thought was the worst thing in the world happened to be the best thing in the world. If I don't work in that treatment facility, I don't get into healthcare. If I don't get into healthcare, I don't end up going down to Chicago, another hospital in Wisconsin that hired me, because I called on them. Because we had people coming out of treatment, so I called on their human resource departments. And one day, one of the human resource department people said, we're looking for somebody here. This was a regular acute care hospital like one we have here. Said, do you want to come work here? So I thought it'd be pretty cool to work at a big hospital. So I went to work at a big hospital. I ended up being the senior vice president of that hospital. Then I went down to Chicago to be chief operating officer of an inner city hospital, which was what a great gift. To work in a hospital where 33% of your babies are cocaine positive, where you speak 14 languages, you have more killings than any place in the United States, including Watts. Because what it taught me is when you don't have money, you have to have people. And we ended up being named Hospital of the Year. And Fortune magazine came in and did a story on our hospital. And when they were doing the story, they said, would you mind if we went around and talked to some of the employees? Now, we really liked the interview until they said that. Then we're going, oh, who are they going to talk to? You know, I mean, you got 1,600 employees. They'll probably pick the one nut job we don't want them to talk to, and that'll be in the paper. Who are they going to talk to? So we, of course, said, great, good idea. Let us take you to some. They said, no, we'd rather just walk by ourselves. Now we're in the office like sweating while they're walking around. They came back. We really didn't know exactly who they talked to because they talked to a lot of people. And then the magazine came out. And they asked Tom Bedell, who recently passed away, in fact, and they asked Tom Bedell, who was a housekeeper. They said, what's the difference between Holy Cross Hospital then and Holy Cross Hospital now? And he said, we used to worry about money and we lost it. Now we worry about people and we make it. And I think that was a great thing that Tom Bedell had. He had it better than anybody. When I built Studer Group, I never built it to sell it. I built it to have a great company. Because if you build something to sell it, you don't build it right because you're thinking about selling it and not building it. So after that, I ended up coming to Pensacola, Florida. I came to Pensacola, Florida, was president of Baptist Hospital. I did one thing, and gosh, this is a trick, but no one will let you do it, but try it anyway. I basically told them in my contract, anything that I developed while I was president there, they did not own, I owned. That I owned all my own intellectual capital. Of course, they said, fine, because what am I going to do? So I ended up having a little deal. I also told them that I might do some things on the side, because Holy Cross was pretty successful. I was still asking to do a few things. And they said, fine. They were wonderful to work with. And then a book came out. Book came out called the Healthcare Advisory Board, and they named the 2 best hospitals in the United States for patient satisfaction. And one of them was Holy Cross Hospital in Chicago, and one of them was Baptist Hospital in Pensacola, Florida. And somebody said, well, my gosh, what do they have in common? And I was. And it was pretty interesting. So basically, people started asking me if I could help their hospital, and that was one of the toughest things I ever went through. Because if I go to help their hospital, I feel like I should be in Pensacola. If I feel like I am in Pensacola and somebody calls me, I think I should be there. So I didn't know what to do. I'm 48 years old, and I think the main thing is don't be a great entrepreneur, be a great employee. Be great wherever you are, the job you have, and the entrepreneurship will appear. But don't try to be an entrepreneur. Try to do a great job with what you were hired to do. And that way you develop the skill set that you can take and scale somewhere else. So we're sitting there, and I was going to not do my own company because I started out as a special ed teacher, which is a pretty secure job. Then I go and I work in healthcare, which is a pretty secure job. I'm 48 years old, and I'm afraid of failure. I've always been afraid of failure. And I've always figured every healthcare executive I ever meet that started their own company probably got fired from where they were, and were doing it as long as their severance agreement lasted so they could get another job. So I'm sitting there and I'm terrified because I got a wife, I got kids, and I'm going to give up a job where I'm making $341,000 plus some bonuses and benefits and a pretty good golden parachute for a full risk job. So I went to see a guy named Norm Adams. Norm Adams was an older gentleman. He's passed away, and I told him about this decision making, and one of my other suggestions is find a close friend and a close mentor. Find somebody that you can share your inside with their outside. Because if you compare your inside to somebody else's outside, it's not a good comparison. Because we're always going to feel a little bit different. So I was lucky. I could share my inside with Norm, and I said, Norm, here's what's going on. I'm pretty afraid to do this. He told me to read a book by Emmett Fox called The Power of Constructive Thinking. And he told me to read a chapter called The Heart Aroused. And in that chapter, it tells the story of a little girl who was thirsty. And she was thirsty, and she told her dad she was thirsty. And her dad then basically said, well, here's a hose, got a hose, turned on the water, and she was drinking that water. And then later on, the water stopped. So she said to her father, the water stopped. and he came over and said, take your foot off the hose. And for some reason, I'd had my foot on the hose for a long, long time. But see, I didn't know it was me on the hose. I just thought it was somebody else was on the hose. So then it said, times in our life our heart gets aroused, but many times we don't go with it because it's not secure, it's not a sure thing, but sometimes you got to go with your heart. So I went with my heart and I started the Studer Group. Now, who would have thought if I wasn't a recovering alcoholic that ended up in a treatment center, I'd never be in healthcare? You just never know what's going to happen. So don't judge a day for a day, because you never know that day. A friend of mine said one day he thought was the greatest day of his life. It turned up to be one of the worst days of his life. And the day he thought was a real bad day, it ended up being a really, really good day. So as we walk through life, my one suggestion is take care of you. Probably the number one reply I send to emails when people write me a note starts off as, please be kind to yourself. Life's tough enough without beating yourself up. I used to tell if there was a cartoon, they could have had me in the ring by myself going like this, wondering who's beating the hell out of me. And it was me beating the heck out of me. So be kind to yourself. Share your inside with somebody's outside. Don't think that you're all alone, because you're not. And before I get into a little bit on entrepreneurship, don't be afraid to reach out for help. Our challenge in our country is if you're physically ill, you can go a lot of places and nobody says anything. If you got mental health issues, all of a sudden there's a stigma. There's a stigma, and it's sort of sad. One of the things that happened to us this year in Pensacola, Florida, is one of our board members of the Studer Community Institute, Blaze Adams, killed himself this year. And I was getting text messages while it was going down, because one of Blaze's friends knew me real well, and he said, we can't find Blaze. I'm really concerned about Blaze. He's moved some money. It looks really, really bad. And then he said they found Blaze in his closet. He's dead. Blaze Adams was a good man. Blaze Adams tried to work real hard. But unfortunately, sometimes when you have another issue, such as depression or something else, you're afraid to reach out, afraid to get help, and afraid to talk about it because how you'll be judged. So one of the reasons I'm so open with this is because that's the way I can help people. This last year, a lady came up to me. It was sort of interesting. She knew me from some work we were doing, and she knew I still go to therapy. I think I'm helping these therapists. Anyway, I still go to therapy. So I go to this therapist. So I'm telling this lady I've got to go to my therapist. And one day I get a phone call. Monday morning, I get a phone call, and she calls me, and she says, can I take your therapist hour? Can I take your appointment? And I said, why? She said, well, my husband won't get out of bed, and he says he's never going to work again the rest of his life. I said, well, maybe it's a little more serious than this. Ending up, because of some of my connections out in California, got him out to California, and he wasn't an alcoholic or a drug addict, but he grew up in a very, very difficult home. He grew up in a home that he was afraid to come out of his bedroom because his mother was an aggressive drunk. And he got so smart because he was afraid to come out of his bedroom. Guess what he did in his bedroom all the time? He read the entire Britannica Encyclopedia because he didn't want to come out of his room, and he read. Very successful. And if you sometimes grow up in an alcoholic home, that you're the oldest child, you're going to make up for the family by being that hero. He became a very successful person, and he thought, if I get the right wife, the right car, the right amount of money, the right house, I will be happy. And then you get it, and you want to blow your brains out. Why? Because it was an inside job, not an outside job. Unfortunately, he got help, and he's doing quite well today. That was, to me, success. That's really what success is all about, is how many people do you touch, how many people do you impact. So, a couple thoughts. Be a great employee. Clarify what people want, whether it's your professor or your employer. Make sure you go to them and say, I want to be successful. By the way, I will give you the question that if you ask in an interview, you will get the job or come dang close. Has anybody ever had a job interview? They ask you the question, don't they? The question is, do you have any questions? And you don't want to right away say, well, how much vacation, how much this, are you serious about breaks? So you don't know, and you either ask a question you don't think is dumb, or you'd say, well, I don't really have any questions right now. Here's the question you ask. Say, if you offer me this job, because you still want to negotiate a little bit, if you offer me this job and I decide to take it, because you don't want to act like you're a sure thing, and I decide to take it, and 1 year from now, I've exceeded your expectations, tell me exactly what would have been accomplished. You won't believe how many people look at you and have no idea. I mean, I'm talking about board of directors. Yet they're going to hire you, but they don't know. Now, your boss might not know how to answer that question, but I'll tell you what they will know, that you're results-oriented. You know what they will know? That you understand what you're looking for. I was traveling on an airplane, and I'm with this guy, and he's going to interview at Disney World. This was years ago, and I was working in healthcare. So, and I noticed him because he had a wood briefcase. He's a creative guy. And he opens up his briefcase, and he's got all these, like, drawings. And we're talking, and he says, I'm going to Disney. He said, I'm interviewing for a cartoonist job. He said, I've wanted to work for Disney my entire life. He even showed me his letter he wrote to get the interview. It said, I really want to work for you. Some of my best friends are already working there. Goofy, Mickey, Minnie. And I gave him this question. And like 3 weeks later, he wrote back and said, I got the job at work, thank you. So make sure you clarify whenever you're in a situation, what does right look like? Because that's really what we're looking for. A couple other things in the job world, and then we'll get into a little bit of this entrepreneur stuff. In the job world, another thing that happens many times is supervisors aren't really clear. And we all want development. Everybody wants to be developed. They want to maximize their own human potential. But you're not always going to have a boss that's going to think like that. It's just the way it happens, But don't be a victim. The number one thing in the message is never be a victim. Because once we're a victim, we give away all the power to control our destiny to somebody else. So here's what you say to your boss or your instructor. You basically say, I'm working on my own development. I'd like to meet with you, and here's the questions I have. Number one, what am I doing well? What am I doing well? Not that I'm looking for a pat on the back, but I want to know what I'm doing well so I can keep on doing it. Next, say, are my priorities in place? Here's what I'm working on, because the biggest complaints I get all the time is I don't know what the priorities are. What I'm trying to do is give you tips so when you enter the work world, you will move quickly, and you will get developed, and you will separate yourself from every other employee that you're working with. So the second question is, my priorities in place? The third question is, what are my opportunities for improvement? Because many times a person doesn't want to hurt somebody's feelings, so they hold back on the feedback. I can't tell you, it's a sad case when people sometimes lose their job and they're shocked and surprised that they're losing their job. I just coached somebody the other day. He was complaining about this employee, and I said, does the employee know how he's doing? He said, he's got to know. I said, well, do me a favor. Ask the employee on a 1 through 10, would 10 be really good, where they would rank their own performance right now. And then where do you rank it? He said, right now I'd give him a 4 or 5. I said, I bet you he's higher than you. He said, well, I can't believe it. So he asked this employee to evaluate himself on a 1 through 10. What do you think he gave himself? 8. So right away we got a gap. We got 2 people that aren't on the same page. So we got to get our boss on the same page. So tell me what opportunities I have to improve. And then the fourth question is there any training or development you would recommend? What you've done is you've positioned yourself beyond anybody else that you can possibly think of, because you're showing them that you're controlling your own development instead of waiting for someone else to develop you. You're separating yourself from the rest of the group. So a couple things. If you're coming up with ideas, try to figure out what the idea is going to solve. When I talk to venture capital firms where they invest money, The first thing they're looking for is tell me the problem you're solving. So don't start with the idea, start with the problem you're solving. So for example, I want to invite you all Tuesday night in downtown Pensacola. You can go to Pensacola News Journal Facebook right now, and Chuck Moran. Chuck Moran is M-A-H-R-O-N. He's founded a company called Strong Towns. It's how to create great communities. And the reason we're doing it is even though there's a lot of good things going on in Pensacola, and I can name them, we still got a lot of issues. And if we don't address the issues such as racism, if we don't address the issues such as low wages, if we don't address the issues of kids not being ready for kindergarten, which means they don't graduate from high school, if we don't, and that's what David and his police force paid for, paid to that type of things. If we don't address those type of issues, we really won't be a great community. So in our work that we're handing out, the first thing we're saying is, why are we bringing in Chuck Moran? Because we got a problem. We got low wages, we got safety issues, we got too many kids not graduating from high school, and we might be broke someday because we're spending a lot of money, but how are we going to pay back? You can pave a lot of roads, but eventually you got to fix them. So let's not pave roads to get reelected. Let's make sure we pave roads so we can sustain it. So he's coming in. But the first thing we're doing is saying, why? So identify your problem. What are you solving? When I started my company at Studer Group, we could identify the problem. Number one, we had too many employee turnover. When you have employee turnover in healthcare, it leads to deaths. The lower the turnover, the more likely someone is to live because you have better handoffs, better explanations, better teamwork. How would you like to go into the hospital and say, well, let me introduce you to so-and-so. This is their first day on the job. Yeah, and they started last week. Or how about a doctor saying, I'm pretty excited. First time I've done this too. So turnover is key. So one of the problems we could solve is we can lower your turnover. If we lower your turnover, you're going to have less cost because you're going to have less overtime and less agency. Oh, by the way, you have less overtime and less agency, you're going to have better patient experience. Oh, by the way, if you have better patient experience, you're going to have less malpractice claims. My second year at Baptist, our malpractice claims went down. We got our reduced $500,000 because we had our claims reduced. Oh, by the way, if we have better employees and less malpractice claims, our doctors are going to be happy. If our doctors are going to be happy, they'll put more patients in this hospital. The problem is we can come in and solve that problem. And quickly they said, well, come on in. And we gave a money-back guarantee. So the other thing I would suggest you do is identify the problem, then come up with the idea to solve the problem. The last thing I'll close with is never underestimate the difference you can make. You know, we give scholarships here. I think we got like 30-something students or something on scholarships right now, my wife and I. They're called Pensacola Pledge. And one of the things, my wife had this idea. I was working for the students. I'm lazy. So she said, I want them to all go mentor. I said, oh, they're busy enough. Let's not make them mentor. Just give them the money. And she said, no, I want them to go mentor. I think that would be good for them. So you got to mentor. And it's so cool because when I talk to students on the Pensacola Pledge, one thing they want to tell me about is they're mentoring. They're mentoring. And one of the greatest stories I remember was we had a young man, freshman here at UWF. He's mentoring a young kindergartner. And it's parent night. It's parent night at his elementary school. He don't have parents. He don't have parents. So guess who invited to come to his parent night that night? The student at UWF came as his parent. That's a pretty cool thing. You never know the difference you make in people's lives. My third grade teacher made a huge impact on me. Her name was Mrs. James. Mrs. James taught me how to read. I couldn't read till I was in third grade, and she taught me how to read. And you know why I listened to Mrs. James? Because she made me feel like she cared. You know the number one reason people leave their job is they don't like their boss? It's not their job, it's their boss. The number one reason people look for their boss is someone that cares. Mrs. James, I would take chances for her because she cared. She also brought in the Chicago Tribune sports page. I like sports. So I learned how to read because I was interested in sports, not the other stuff. I even got pretty good in math because sports is a lot of math. That was Mrs. James. She also didn't embarrass me because I had a speech impediment. I never had to do anything where I read out loud or talked in front of the group because she knew I would fail. She set me up for success. My sixth grade teacher was Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry liked me right off the bat. I could tell. He slid my desk right next to his. We co-taught that entire year. Why? Because he knew he had somebody that 4th and 5th grade teachers didn't like. Ran around the class, I disturbed other kids, didn't pay attention, blah, blah, blah. Mr. Fry stuck me right next to him because every time I looked like I wasn't paying attention, he could give me stuff to do. He also knew because of my hearing I'd be behind and I needed extra help. And nobody wants to get extra help. Nobody raises their hand who needs more help. Nobody raises their hand. I used to say, who gets it? Nobody raised their hand either. So basically, he helped me. He also did something else. He looked for what's right. When my mom came to student-teacher conferences that year, she came home excited because Mr. Fry said he enjoyed having me in class. He said, he's a bundle of energy. We just got to keep it moving in the right direction. He saw something that drove the 4th and 5th grader teachers crazy as something as an obstacle, and he saw it as opportunity. My second grandson, Caden, has a real bad speech impediment. It's better now. So when he was 3 years old, he got put into special classes for speech. He'd already had a rough time in daycare because when kids made fun of him, Caden became very tough because of his speech impediment. Because when anybody teased him, he punched him. So he got thrown out of like a daycare center, got thrown out of swim because he'd hit the teacher. Anyway, so he'd been like already tossed out of 2 places before he gets into this talk and learn. Talk and learn. So my daughter's a nervous wreck about him going to talk and learn. So she goes to pick him up one day, and the teacher's aide comes up to her, gives her Caden, and says, I enjoy having him in my class. Guess what my daughter did on the way home? She cried. Isn't that what we want? Our child to be successful? So I went to high school at the biggest high school in Illinois, 5,300 kids, 1,300 kids in my class. You gotta be really good to do anything. And I wanted to be an athlete, but I wasn't good enough. Couldn't do football. Certainly couldn't do cross country because I can't run. I don't like to run. Anyway, so they have this new sport called soccer. I never really heard of it. It came out in 1965, but I knew they weren't going to cut anybody. And that was the magic words for me. Nobody gets cut because I'm afraid of failure. So I go out for soccer. I run into this fella named Coach King. I'm going and I go to kick the ball and I miss it. And Coach King goes, way to get over there. Way to hustle. Good job. Next time, put your foot out. But you did a good job getting over there. See, that's the key. In some of my books, I call it you sport, you coach, you sport, because it takes 3 positives to every 1 criticism for somebody to feel better about another human being. If you want somebody to pay attention to you, start with a compliment. I was meeting with Dr. Saunders before I came in here, and I thought she wasn't paying a lot of attention, so I said, Martha, I got a compliment for you. She hung. Did you notice that, Howard? She got right at me right then. What? You heard something positive. Anyway, so it takes 3 compliments to every 1 criticism. He changed my life in a number of ways, but then sophomore year and freshman year, but then junior year I got cut right away, first cut, just right off the bat. You know, I got in the locker room, I got cut. Anyway, so I'm sitting there. I'm not doing well in school because I'm behind. I'm feeling like a loser. And all of a sudden I get a phone call from Lee Benesick before my senior year in high school because soccer started earlier. And he said, Quint, Coach King wanted me to call you and tell you to come out for soccer. I said, Coach King's the sophomore coach. He said, no, he's the new varsity coach. He wants you out. That phone call made a huge difference to me. Isn't that what we wanted, to sort of feel wanted? So I went out for soccer. I got my letter. It was a big deal for me, maybe not for anybody else. So I got my letter. Every Friday, you could wear your letter sweater to school, and that made me feel like I fit in. Years ago, we moved, and Rishi, my wife, kept moving junk I wanted to throw out, you know, like baby stuff, and we hadn't had a baby in a lot of years. So one day I said, why don't I throw this baby stuff out? We're not going to use it. She said, fine, put your letter sweater on top of it when you throw them out. So where do you want me to put this stuff anyway? I still got my letter sweater. Coach King also allowed me to come to his classroom. He allowed me to come to his classroom my senior year and be a teacher's aide. When I got to college, they said, what do you want to major in? I said, well, I want to be a teacher because Mrs. James and Coach Fry and Mr. Fry and Coach King. They said, what do you want to teach? And I got scared because I can't spell. I can't even spell today. Can't spell. People write me an email, and I responded one time, and this guy said, there's no way that he responded. Somebody else is doing that for him. So she wrote me another email. Is this you or somebody else? I said, and the last email were some words misspelled. She said, yes. I said, it's me. It's me. So I'm afraid of looking stupid again. Again, afraid of looking bad. But I remember Coach King. Coach King taught special education, so I became a special education teacher. People ask me, have I ever been able to thank Mrs. James or Mr. Fry? But I could thank Coach King. Years ago, I was speaking in Asheville, North Carolina, and they told me to tell this story I just told you. And when I told it, they had flown Coach King in from Chicago, and he walked out on the stage. I got to tell Coach King the difference he had made in my life. You're young enough that you can tell people right now the difference they made in your life. So really, when you talk about how to be successful, it starts on the inside. Make sure yourself is right. And don't beat on yourself. Don't be too rough on yourself. There's a lot of people that do that. But if you need a little bit of help, just like if you had a sprained ankle, you'd get help. Don't be afraid to reach out for help. Number 2, obstacles are opportunities. Here I thought my hearing was an obstacle, it became an opportunity. My speech impediment was an obstacle, it became an opportunity. If it wasn't for my speech impediment, I don't think I'd stuck around Pensacola pushing sometimes when you feel like quitting. And if it wasn't for my alcoholism, I would have never got into healthcare. If I'd never got into healthcare, I would have never had a company. If I never had a company, I could have never sold the company. If I didn't sell the company, I couldn't put money back into the community, which is really what this thing's all about. I love Mickey Rooney because when he died, he had $27,000 to his name. When I first sold my company, an accountant came and she said, you know, at 84, you'll have this much money. I'm thinking, now what am I going to do with that much money at 84? I said, my goal is to spend it and spend it now so we can watch people enjoy life. That's what we like to do. We like to see people enjoy life, whether it's at a Wahoo game, whether it's in the community, whether it's last Saturday spending money with the Pensacola Pledge Scholars here, whether it's helping you with jobs. Closing on the Center for Entrepreneurship, here's what I've heard today in talking to some of the students. Number 1, you want people that do it into your classrooms. We have over 120 people in the community right now that are successful business people that want to come into your classrooms. So what we'd like to do is create a match so instructors can bring them into your classrooms. Because what we heard from many of you is you want to also, not only the great teachers you have, but you want to augment them with other people that have been in the business and do it just like Katie Garrett at Old Hickory Whiskey Bar, or Marcel Salzman here, who's a great president of a PTA that knows how to lead, or David Alexander, a police chief in the city of Pensacola, to learn from people that have done it. The other thing you've said is you want practical experience. We got a ton of people in this community that want you to come job shadow, want you to come intern, and want you to come train. But they're going to do it for all sorts of reasons. One, they're going to do it because it's the right thing to do, but also they're going to do it because they want talent. And the best thing that you have is you have something that everybody wants is talent. So that's a little bit about the Center for Entrepreneurship. So obstacles are opportunities, and don't ever underestimate the difference you make in people's lives. My nephew, Brian Fitzpatrick, was a Division I baseball player at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And ironically, you know, my alcoholism, but same date almost, December 24th, years later, 13 years later, he's killed in a car wreck in the city of Chicago, a one-car accident, early in the morning. That Christmas Eve, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law get a phone call to come to Christ Hospital in Chicago. When they get there, they heard their 19-year-old son has been pronounced dead. We get a phone call from one of the relatives. They say, Brian Fitzpatrick is dead. I wake up my wife, it's 5 in the morning, we load our kids, we're in Chicago now, we go to her sister and brother-in-law's house, the Fitzpatricks, and you deal with the fact you've lost a 19-year-old child. The next day was Christmas. Well, at Christmas, we all go back to the home again, and now Kathy, the mother, and the father have pictures of Brian everywhere. They're dealing with the death of their son. And the next day was the wake. We go to the wake, the University of Illinois Chicago team, they line up like it's baseball in their uniform, even though it's winter, and they stay by the casket the entire wake. The next day is the funeral. So that's sort of how we thought it ended. Now, 4 years later, I'm now in Pensacola, Florida, and I was asked to speak at a hospital in Chicago. So as I get into Chicago, I call up the Fitzpatrick family, and Mike answers, and I say, Mike, I'm here in Chicago. I'm going to be speaking at Christ Hospital tomorrow. He goes, that's the hospital Brian was taken it to. Then he quickly said to his wife, Kathy, Quint's going to Christ Hospital, he's going to speak at Christ Hospital, and she said, tell him to say thank you. Now, this is a woman who 4 years earlier lost her son, and what she can think about to that hospital is, thank you. She said, they were so kind to us. Now, the next day I get up and I go to speak to about 300-400 people, and my name's Studer, that's Fitzpatrick, never put the combination together, had no communication about Brian being there and pronounced dead at that hospital. I get up and I say, on behalf of the Fitzpatrick family, I'm explaining that that was my nephew, they're my brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Thank you for the kindness that you gave Brian. Talked for about an hour, got in a plane, flew back to Pensacola, Florida. I'm sitting in my office and I get a card. And I just think it's a card from a patient from the hospital. I open it up and it says, Dear Mr. Studer, I'm a nurse. I work in the emergency room at Christ Hospital. I'm the one that was there when your nephew was brought in. I'm the one that talked to your brother-in-law and sister, or your family. I want you to know that there's not a Christmas that goes by that I don't think about that family. Now, I wanted to tell you that she knew the impact she had on my brother-in-law and sister-in-law. But you know what? When you lose a son or a daughter, they don't call and say, how was the care? You don't get a survey that said, how was it? So there was no way, and they were so grieving, they never thought about writing a thank you note to the emergency room. So this nurse had no idea the impact that she had until I went there and spoke. Now, a couple things. Number one, the nurse didn't do it because she was looking for a thank you note. When we hook our behavior to our values, that's what's really the magic appears, because then we do it even when we don't want to do it, because our values won't let us do anything else, and we do it for the right reasons. But also, don't underestimate the difference you make in people's lives, whether it's another student that you talk to, whether it's a teacher. Teachers are going to have some bad moments. I mean, if somebody, can you imagine going up to your professor and say, can I see you for a minute? I just want to tell you what an unbelievable, great class you do here. Every day I come, I leave with so much more intelligence than when I walk in. All the students say that, and I just wanted to thank you. You'd walk out and they say, whoa, 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 what medication is that kid on? So don't think that people know they're making a difference. I'm not saying do something so you get the credit, but don't underestimate the difference you make in people's lives. I didn't donate money to University of West Florida. I invested money in University of West Florida, and I'm very confident I'm going to get a return on that investment. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here.